Newsmaker Sunday with Fox 10's
Thank you for joining us on Newsmaker Sunday. We are pleased to have on the program again Dr. Jasser. He is the founder and president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy. A little bit about Dr. Jasser. He is a Syrian-American activist, a Navy veteran, physician, and observant Muslim. He's a noted expert on Islamism, Islamist terror groups, and Middle East foreign policy. Thanks for being with us.
It's great to
on Newsmaker Sunday. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
We've got so much going on with what's happening with ISIS in Syria, in Iraq. Now we are kind of headlong into this thing, but still trying to keep a little bit of distance from it. It's going to be airstrikes, at least in the beginning. What's your take on what's happening there right now?
You know, well, I'll tell you, I think that this is a natural of a cancer that started 3 years ago in Syria and now has metastasized and shifted into northern Iraq, and we're finally waking up to treat it. Many of us, I mean, I briefed Congress 2.5 years ago when there was no Al-Qaeda in Syria, there was no ISIS even known what that was, that tumor would grow and fester. The Muslim population in Syria would be radicalized if we didn't treat the problem, which was Assad. The Assad regime, in a vicious, barbaric way, has been massacring cities, towns, neighborhoods, populations, has killed over 250,000 people. 5 million people are displaced. And, you know, if you
But
do that,
we paid attention when this happened.
Right. And
James Foley was the first.
Yeah. And, you know, ISIS is the other side of the coin of Assad, is that basically you have a opposition in Syria that's been fueled not by America, but by Saudi Arabia and Qatar. The Islamic State and its vicious way that it approaches minorities, Christians, and the West is a natural militant offshoot of the Saudi ideology, of the Wahhabism that comes from there. And when you have Qatar, which is the home base of the Muslim Brotherhood globally, fueling this, you're going to have militant groups like ISIS come out of that. You can't deny that.
Did we know, I mean, we focused so much on Al-Qaeda in the early 2000s because obviously of 9/11, but did we know about ISIS at that point? Did we know that this group was out there, or were they not really out there?
Well, we knew about radical Islam. We knew that the Muslim Brotherhood had militant offshoots. Hamas was in existence for decades, and Al-Qaeda was in existence. So militant or radical Islam is like a hydra. You cut off one head, it creates others. So ISIS is sort of the permutation of militant Islam that was fighting a battle which almost every Syrian I know believes is a legitimate war for freedom against a tyrannical regime that actually, if you look at the bombing patterns, has left northeastern Syria and the command and control center of ISIS alone. Because as long as ISIS exists, they can legitimize a military dictatorship.
So you believe Assad wants this to continue because it gives him a bogeyman to focus on?
And it's not only my belief. General Keane, the American Enterprise Institute, every analyst that has reported on why ISIS is so strong and why it has the people and manpower to do all the social propaganda and how it's been pulling in an Islamo-patriotism way jihadists there is because they've been left alone. Assad's been too busy barrel bombing our families in Aleppo and Damascus, killing the moderates that are actually the bigger threat. And why are they a bigger threat to Assad? Because those are the moderates that would have woken up America and the West to actually a legitimate post-Assad regime.
What would have happened had we, Dr. Jasser, gone in there seriously and adhered to the red line that the president set?
I believe, as Senator McCain and others that have sound foreign policy visions have said, is that you would have given, all you needed is air cover, no-fly zones, to give the Free Syria Army, especially in the southwest, the
room to operate, yes.
The room to operate. This is not Iraq. This is not where you're going into a country where there's no indigenous revolution. You have millions of people rising up. And the president, I will tell you, one of the things that most offended me in the past few weeks was when the president called them pharmacists and doctors, and as if that somehow makes them not warriors. The American Revolution, so many wars in history that were legitimate wars were fought by citizens that wanted freedom. And my grandfather and father escaped politically after being imprisoned in Syria under this regime, or the Baathists before them, because they weren't able to be free. And one of the things my grandfather said is, you know, every people deserve the government they have. And now the Syrians are fighting for their freedom, finally woke up in 2011, and the our war weariness has abandoned that.
So this argument that we don't know who's on the right side and the wrong side, that if we start arming rebels, this stuff could end up being used against us. You don't buy that?
I buy that there's that risk, but remember, the choice here is to do nothing, which gives Russia and Iran especially the green light to move in, Saudi Arabia to move in, and a country that borders Israel, our greatest ally in the Middle East, would become even more radicalized. If you didn't agree with me 3 years ago, doing nothing is proving today to have created ISIS. Doing nothing has proven to create the largest jihadist magnet in the world in the last 20 years.
Do you put that at the president's doorstep?
Yeah, absolutely. Leadership is not about deciding politically in August 2013 that we won't go in because only 30% of America thought it was a good idea.
He actually left it to Congress at the time.
Exactly.
He said, if Congress goes ahead, we'll do it.
You tell thugs like Assad, I'm going in, and then you don't because you don't have the political support. Leaders lead the country into what we have to do, not that we want to do, what we have to do for our own security. And now you have 300 Americans serving in ISIS that may come back and hurt our own homeland security.
How much is the threat? Do you believe how much of this is a threat directly toward the United States as we sit here today?
I think globally and domestically we have threat greater than we've ever seen.
You really believe that? Bigger than before 9/11?
Well, think about it. You know, after 9/11, Britain had 7/7. We had November 5th, 2009 with Nidal Hassan. We had the Boston bombings. But you still had only 300 arrests on terrorism, and 85% of those were American Muslims. In the last 6 months alone, we've had 300 American Muslims serving in ISIS with one of the most militant, anti-American, anti-Western movements we've yet to see come out of the Middle East. Those also have tentacles into, we've seen a Muslim convert arrested in Colorado. Mr. Brown was arrested for jihad in Seattle and on the East Coast.
You worry that ISIS terrorists are here living among us right now?
2 suicide bombers already, one from Florida. Somalis have been recruited to Syria. And it's much easier for them to do an act here before trying to get to Syria.
Right.
So there's no doubt that the risk is higher than it's ever been.
Let me ask you, how do you fight an ideology, which strikes me that that's where we are right now?
Number one, you have leadership that's ready to identify it and not afraid. When the president's telling me as a Muslim they're not Islamic, you know, that's not, he's enabling. He's becoming the enabler in chief by not helping us get through the 12-step program.
You're saying political correctness has prevented the politicians and the leaders from calling it like it really is.
And what's more difficult than the Cold War, where we identified communism as the problem, is this is a theopolitical ideology. And we have to put it in a historical context. The solution comes from within Islam. So you can't say that, you know, all Islam is the problem, because we are going through, I believe, the same process that the West went through during the American Revolution, where the church was countered and we had wars against theocracy. I think that's where Islam is today.
You're telling me we're 2 centuries in this. We've got to look at it through that prism instead of a 21st century prism.
Muslims need to go through a reformation of reforming, taking our scripture and reinterpreting it in light of modern day or ijtihad, where we say that Iranian Islamic Republic, the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, Saudi Arabian Sharia law that oppresses and prosecutes and imprisons Christians and moderate Muslims who are called apostates like myself, that needs to be put into history, needs to be defeated ideologically, and the laboratory to do that, John, is in America. Muslims in America, and we're giving them a pass by saying, oh, that's not Islam, forget about it, you know, nothing to see here, walk along, and let these Islamic groups like CARE, which is part of the organization, Islamic cooperation lobby that wants to put America on the defense, prevent open discourse of debate, and prevent reform, and it prevents us from having a seat at the table.
You're saying as well that you did it in an editorial just a few weeks ago, you're taking heat at your own mosque in Scottsdale over your views.
And, you know, all these things are related. It's not separate issues. I took heat at my mosque by surprise at one of the largest, most important holidays of our annual Islamic calendar, which was at the end of Ramadan. A sermon that started beautifully by Imam Ali there ended up talking about Muslims amongst us that are not one of us. And that's a claim of apostasy. Now, he didn't incite violence or any of that, but I can tell you in a more moderate, camouflaged way, he's basically saying that Muslims that are talking about reform and problems within are the problem. He claimed that that I in my work am anti-Muslim. He didn't say my name, but But I can tell you in social media after the mosque sermon was done, hundreds thought he was talking about me and were ready to make sure that I couldn't be in any mosques, that I should not be identified in media as being Muslim and being from this community. And I can tell you, when Americans say, where are the moderate voices, we are being smothered by lobbying organizations from petrodollars in the Middle East that are too afraid or too apologetic to deal with the realities that we are pre-modern in our interpretation.
You have children.
Absolutely.
What do you tell them about the struggle you're going through to try to, in your view, express yourself, call it like you see it, and then you're chastised for it?
In my book, A Battle for the Soul of Islam, at the end of it, I have a letter to my kids. And I tell them that this is a battle that I won't be able to finish in my lifetime, that it's going to take generations to reform Islamic law, to bring it into modernity, no different than canon law in Christianity got marginalized from government. Law gets modernized, and we can separate mosque and state. But what we can do in my lifetime is to help classical liberals, those who are part of movements to interpret our faith based in reason, and to have a personal relationship with God. I do this from a position of love for my faith. The Al-Qaedas and the ISISs of the world, as well as the Assads and the Mubaraks and the Saddam Husseins of the world, make me feel that I have a responsibility, not only as a Muslim, but as an American who believes that this country is the best place to practice my faith in the world. A responsibility.
This is what we heard, though, after 9/11, time and time again. This act does not speak of Islam or Muslims at large. This act is isolated. It's a bastardization of the religion. It's not pure. You're saying that there is part of this that is very much alive and well.
You know, John, I mean, it's not my Islam. It's not the Islam I teach my kids about being compassionate, merciful, humble, and living in freedom and respecting. I mean, when I served in the Navy for 11 years, this was the military I wanted to serve in. Jihad means nothing to me globally. But if we as Muslims don't address the fact that there are Islamo-patriots out there that want to serve in a jihad against the West, that there are versions of Islam out there that's not just a small little ISIS group, which is in the scheme of 1.6 billion people, a small little gnat of 20,000 people. There are hundreds of millions of people driven by ideologies that drive the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. The Republic of Iran is driven by tens of millions that believe in the ideology of Khomeini. The Wahhabis of Saudi Arabia. The Brotherhood of Egypt took over a government by election. So this is a movement that I think conservatively is 30% of the Muslim population that believes not in violence of terrorism and beheadings, but in ideologies that, left to their own devices, will create Islamic states that are theocracies and supremacists.
Let me pull this, before we go to break, I want to pull this back for a moment to where we are with trying to battle ISIS in Iraq and Syria. Let me run tape number 1 here for a moment. This is a president assuring the nation that there will not be boots on the ground. I want to watch this and get your reaction. Go ahead.
I want to be clear. The American forces that have been deployed to Iraq do not and will not have a combat mission. As your commander-in-chief, I will not commit you and the rest of our armed forces to fighting another ground war in Iraq.
This mission isn't just about taking out an enemy on the battlefield. It's about taking out a network.
This is a war, and I know the president is trying to continue to characterize this as a bunch of ragtag terrorists out there. That's not the case.
When the president said that, do you believe that's wise to telegraph that you will not put boots on the ground? Can you just leave it open-ended, leave the politics out of it?
Absolutely not. You know, the way these dictators and thugs and brutal barbarians work is, if they know they're going to be left alone, they will wait it out. And that's what they did last year. Assad laughed. If you looked at Syrian media while the president was waiting for congressional approval, Iran was laughing about it. If you look at Iranian media this past week alone, they are posturing that they will never help America, as if we're on their side. The president should have made it clear that not only will we not be helping Iran, we continue to want regime change there, and he won't say that. He mentioned Assad's name once. And I can tell you, for any Syrian or any policy analyst that knows where ISIL came from, it came out of the Syrian radicalism that has happened because of Assad's massacring. And if you're going to treat that, you have to do it from a position of strength. And he's telegraphing what we're doing. All I can tell you is that most Syrians right now are happy to get anything we can. If they're going to bomb, as much as ISIS is not going to, getting rid of ISIS isn't going to solve the problem, at least it'll take away one of the fronts in the war that the Free Syria Army. The Free Syria Army is the only group that's actually battling ISIS right now. Assad's army is not battling ISIS.
There is no way, and as much as we like to have it, a nice, clean airstrike campaign, and it's very sterile, there is no way you're not going to get civilian casualties doing this stuff. And the minute we start getting images of that, we're going to have a problem on our hands, aren't we?
Absolutely. And, you know, this president is sort of backing into this conflict, and we knew that's what's going to happen. Syria is in a nexus of major American interests for security, Israeli security, and others, and there could have been a much simpler way to do this. The Syrian military has anti-aircraft capabilities that are from Russia, and if they decide to not allow us to violate their airspace, we may end up losing some pilots. And it's going to change the entire equation.
We're going to take a break here. Dr. Zuhdi Jasser is our guest on Newsmaker Sunday as we talk about the continuing strife in the Middle East, and this time we're talking about battling ISIS in Syria and Iraq. Back in a minute on Newsmaker Sunday.
It's Chevy Truck Month. Time when truck guys can depend on great offers on the 2014 North American Truck of the Year. Chevy Silverado, from the family of the most dependable, longest-lasting, full-size pickups on the road. It's Truck Month. Trade up to the Silverado Crew Cab LT All-Star Edition for a total value of $8,500. It's Truck Month. See your local Chevy dealer today.
Yeah. I called around for auto insurance quotes, and
it seems like they're all the same.
If you want a company that feels different the very first time you call, then try Amica.
There has to be something better.
Our whole company is dedicated to great customer service and save money. For example, you can save up to 25% when you insure more than one car with Amica.
Hey, why don't you call Amica? That's a great company.
Yes, listen to that guy. Bicycle guy.
Well, who haven't we tried yet?
Amica.
Call Amica now for your free, no-obligation quote.
The Volkswagen Passat is heads above the competition, but we're not in the business of naming names. The fact is, it comes standard with an engine that's been called the benchmark of its class. Really, guys? I thought... It also has more rear legroom than other mid-size sedans. And the Volkswagen Passat has a lower starting price than... much better.
Hurry in and get 0% APR for 72 months on 2014 Passat models, or at least the 2014 Passat S for $179 a month.
As we're dealing with impending airstrikes in Iraq and Syria, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser is our guest on Newsmaker Sunday. His book, The Battle for the Soul of Islam. We've had Dr. Jasser on the program several times before. It's great to have him back. Again, he is a Syrian-American activist, a Navy veteran, a physician, and observant Muslim. Is this something that you think we can solve with airstrikes alone? Because even Major Dempsey said he may have to recommend to the president at some point that we're going to need boots on the ground.
It depends where we're talking about. If it's northern Iraq, I don't think so. I think we need boots on the ground because the Iraqi military has not been trained enough. They don't seem to be capable. They've allowed this to happen. I can give you 12 reasons why.
Politically, that's an impossible spot for President Obama, though.
Just as the Senate was hearing this week, we should have left troops there. It didn't need that many troops to stay there like we did in Korea and Germany and Japan and elsewhere to maintain a peace that for 10 years.
Yeah, we've got 50,000 in Korea still.
I know. Our sons and daughters gave so much. Tax-paying dollars gave so much to shift the Middle East at a time that presciently was going through an Arab awakening that probably saved Iraq its own revolution, and ultimately now we vacated the premises and handed it over to Iran, where Iran now has annexed Syria, and you see a Shiite radical crescent all the way into Lebanon with Hezbollah. I mean, it is a disaster how much we've lost in American and free influence of liberty across the Middle East.
And Dr. Jasser, how much does this threaten us because we've let this thing kind of get out of hand? What do you think the upshot is for America and our security?
I think global security, you have an empowered, unleashed Iran who is on their way to getting nuclear weapons, where they have the ideology, no different than Hezbollah, where they want to usher in the end of times, and they could translate a single suicide bomber into a national suicide bombing, so they can't get a nuclear weapon, and they've unleashed Assad into a genocide.
But it appears that they're months or a year away from having a nuclear weapon.
And this is what's unsaid, almost as if our weakness is being telegraphed as a mechanism to bring them to the table, when in fact you look at Iranian Farsi media, they're actually using this as a mechanism to say that they have us at our knees. So that's not how you deal with Islamist thugs, by weakness.
How do you deal with it?
You deal with it with strength, and you tell them that this is the way it's going to be, and we will not back down, and we will defend the liberals on the ground. We walked away from the Green Revolution in Iran in 2009, and the revolution in Syria would have been a success story in the Middle East, not without bloodshed, but a success story had we at least helped fuel that population to defend themselves against the military machine.
Someone sitting on the couch out there right now, though, is listening to this saying, you're talking about endless entanglements in the Middle East. Where does it stop?
Well, we were entangled with the Soviets after a long World War II for 30, 40 years, until that wall came down and the Soviet Union fell apart without firing a bullet.
We're still dealing with them, though.
This is what we're missing. We're missing a president, leadership in Washington with a vision, a doctrine. This president doesn't even have a doctrine. We need a liberty doctrine, and I would say his doctrine is the Darwin doctrine of letting the most evil sort of survive while we sort of passively disappear. And it threatens our homeland. These ISIS recruits, hundreds, are threatening cities all across the country. God knows how much that's costing us. And what's next? You cut off this head, ISIS disappears in this whack-a-mole program. We're going to have more whack-a-moles that we need to do in America. And ultimately, we need to take sides within the House of Islam. The Islamic Ummah, the community, is going through a huge, tumultuous tectonic shift right now. And it's either going to get filled in by the petrodollars, the Islamic theocrats, which is what's happening after the Arab awakening, or it can get filled in with reformists, with moderates. And I can tell you, we have a coalition called the American Islamic Leadership Coalition that's working to bring up ideas of reform and liberalism and women's rights. And I can tell you that Muslim populations are starving for support for civil society change. And we've abandoned them. The State Department has no policy.
Let me roll some video of drones in action. It strikes me that we're trying to run our wars in a very sterile way. Reflexively, after Iraq, our entanglement there, Afghanistan, we just don't want to get dirtied up by this stuff. So we send the drones in to do it. What does this do to the ideology? How much is this an irritant to the combatants we're dealing with? Is it a recruiting tool that they say these Americans, these, you know, what do they call us, cowards? They send their drones over, but they won't put any people out there. I wonder if it works against us in some respects.
Groups like ISIS, the solution to them is a military one. But the global Cold War, this 20th century against political Islam, that war is only an ideological one. It cannot be won from drones. And actually that fuels, dropping bombs fuels them, because they use it as propaganda to say that the West is conspiratorially against Islam, and it's propaganda that the Islamic governments use against us to allow them to maintain dictatorships and monarchy and prevent real change. So this is why, as we look, you know, we can close our eyes, and, you know, both parties are guilty. You have the isolationist wing on the right and the left that wants to come back at home. And when you're the leaders of the free world, and we're the wealthiest country on the planet, we have responsibilities that come with it, and people will come after us whether we want it or not.
So you're saying pay him now or pay him later. We've got to engage.
You're talking about an ideology, John, that has a constituency of 25% of the world's population. This isn't the Westboro Baptist Church, you know, or a small little faction. It has a huge global constituency that will spread like wildfire, already dominates 56 Muslim countries, and not the grassroots, because they're trying to fight back, but we need to take sides.
We got to take a break. Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, our guest on Newsmaker Sunday, back in a moment. Back on Newsmaker Sunday with Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. His book is called A Battle for the Soul of Islam, and we're proud to have him back on the program. Final moments. Where do we go from here? I feel like we're no better off than we were right after 9/11. Am I wrong about that?
were far worse than we were right after 9/11.
That's
was just
really
Al-Qaeda.
frustrating.
Now you have an Arab awakening where Islamist movements are marching in to fill in a vacuum that was an opportunity, and we've lost that opportunity. So right now, short term, we decimate ISIS or ISIL, whatever you want to call them. We decimate that Islamic State. Long term, we declare an ideological war of ideas against all Islamic states and let Muslims lead that reform and have a strategy, a public-private partnership in America where we say democracy and liberalism is going to take on political Islam globally, not against all Muslims, not against Islam as a faith, but begin to have Muslims go through the same thing that happened in the West in the 18th century that created America.
So right now, you're saying that the Muslim nations, the Islamist nations, are where we were in the 18th century, basically, in that struggle, that kind of, this is not unique. This has happened before, right?
Absolutely, and there's a mix here. As we saw, even after American Revolution, we had a bounce back to other fascisms and German nationalism, Italian nationalism with Hitler and Mussolini and others. Arab fascism is the other side of the Islamist fascism coin. So Assad is the Arab fascist part of that equation that creates this mirror image, which is political Islam, that they use to control and dominate their country. So the liberals need to be helped.
Thank you, Dr. Jasser. Great
John.
to see you again. And we'll see you next week on Newsmaker Sunday. Thanks for your time today. Appreciate it.